My name is Walter Briggs, and I'm 62 years old now. I live in a small cabin tucked deep into the hills of Northern California. It's quiet out here, peaceful most days. I chop my own wood, cook simple meals, and spend a lot of time sitting on the porch, listening to the wind through the pines. It's the kind of life most people grow into, I guess. Solitude doesn't scare me like it used to. These days it feels more like an old friend. But there's something I need to share. Something that happened more than 20 years ago. Something I've never talked about out loud. Even after all this time, it still sits in my chest like a stone I haven't quite learned how to carry. I don't tell it for attention. I don't tell it for belief. I tell it because it changed me, in ways I still don't fully understand. Back then, I was a different man. Younger, lonelier, still trying to figure out how to live after losing my wife. My days were quieter, my nights longer. I thought I knew everything these woods had to show me. But sometimes life hands you something so unexpected it doesn't just change the day. It changes every day after that. That moment for me was a winter morning, cold, silent, just like the hundreds before it. But before the sun rose that day, something showed up outside my door. Something I'll never forget was one of those winter mornings when the cold creeps into your bones before you're even fully awake. The kind of cold that makes the wood in the walls groan and the air sting your lungs. I remember stepping outside just before dawn to bring in the firewood I'd split the day before. That's when I heard it, a sound I couldn't place at first. Not loud, not clear, but struggling. A soft, ragged breath mixed with a faint whimper. I walked toward the edge of the porch, and that's when I saw it. A small, curled-up shape lying in the snow just a few feet from the steps. I froze. My first thought was, is that a baby bear? It was shivering, barely moving. Its fur was thick, dark, almost matted with frost. I could see its breath, slow and uneven. But something was off. The limbs looked longer. The head shape wasn't quite right. I took one cautious step closer, and that's when I saw its hand. Not a paw, a hand. Long fingers, curled into the snow, trembling in the cold. The rest of its body looked like some mix between a human child and an animal, small but not tiny, weak but still holding on. My heart was pounding. Every instinct in me said to back away. You don't mess with wild things out here. But then it let out this small, soft cry. Not a growl, a cry, like a baby calling for help. I felt something shift inside me. Fear didn't leave, but it loosened its grip, just enough for something else to take over. Compassion. Before I could talk myself out of it, I bent down, slid my arms under that trembling body, and lifted it up. Whatever it wasn't going to survive the morning out there, and I couldn't walk away from it. The moment I stepped inside with the creature in my arms, I felt the full weight of what I'd done. I closed the cabin door fast, half expecting something bigger to come crashing out of the woods after me. But nothing came, just the howling wind and the thick silence of winter. I laid the creature down near the fireplace on an old blanket. Its body was ice cold, shaking uncontrollably. I didn't know what it was exactly, but I knew enough to see it was dying. Dehydrated, starving, and close to shutting down. I checked its pulse, and even that was faint. Its skin under the fur felt thin, like it hadn't been warmed in days. That's when the fear hit me harder. What if this thing was wild enough to turn on me when it got better? What if its family was nearby watching? What if helping it was the worst mistake I could make out here alone? But all that quieted the moment I saw its eyes flicker open. Amber-colored, deep, alert, but not violent. Just scared. There was a kind of silent pleading in those eyes, something I recognized even without words. I didn't have the right kind of food for a creature like this, but I knew I had to try something. I warmed up some milk on the stove, mixed it with mashed up oatmeal to make it thicker and easier to digest. I scooped a bit onto a spoon, held it to its mouth. At first nothing. Then slowly it opened its lips and drank. Not like an animal, more controlled, more aware. As the hours passed, I sat by the fire, watching it sleep. Every now and then it'd twitch or reach out a hand as if reaching for comfort. When I rested my hand lightly nearby, its fingers curled toward mine, gentle, seeking warmth. It wasn't just surviving. It was responding. That night I told myself I'd just help it through the night. That's all. But somewhere in my chest I already knew. This was the start of something I wasn't walking away from. The next few days turned into weeks, and the little one, whatever he was, began to recover. The shivering stopped first. Then the coughing eased. His breathing got stronger and his eyes stayed open longer. That's when I started to really notice him, not as some unknown creature, but as someone present. His fur was a dark, earthy brown, thick and coarse, with lighter patches around the shoulders and face. His eyes, always those eyes, an amber that seemed to catch every spark of firelight. His arms were long, almost awkwardly so for his small size, and his hands larger than any normal child's. But his movements were gentle, almost careful. He watched me constantly, not in fear but in a quiet curiosity. The first time I saw him stand, I realized how different he truly was. Upright, balanced, studying me. Not like a wild animal would, but like a child wondering what comes next. I started calling him Rook. Don't know why. It just felt right, like the name was already waiting for him. Rook began to recognize my voice, turning toward me when I spoke, calming when I walked into the room. One morning, while I was splitting firewood outside, I heard a soft grunt behind me. I turned and saw him holding out one of the kindling pieces I'd dropped. His hand small, but the gesture, deliberate, helpful. That moment stayed with me. Before Rook, the cabin had been quiet, too quiet. Ever since my wife passed, the silence felt like a shadow I couldn't shake. But with him there, breathing, moving, watching, it felt less like a place of loss and more like life again. I didn't know what he was exactly or where he'd come from, but I knew this much: he wasn't just recovering, he was connecting, and so was I. By the end of the first year, Rook was nearly up to my chest in height. His frame had filled out, muscles firm and agile under dense fur. But what stood out the most wasn't his strength. It was how he'd begun to live alongside me, like we'd always been meant to find each other. We fell into a rhythm, like two souls quietly learning how to share the same space. Meals became shared moments, simple things like roasted potatoes, beans, or fruit I had foraged. Rook didn't speak in words, but his sounds had rhythm and intention. A short, deep hum when he was content, a soft click when something caught his interest. I began to teach him simple gestures: point, nod, stay, and he learned faster than I expected. Not just mimicking, understanding. Soon we developed our own quiet language. A touch to the arm meant follow. A raised hand meant stop. He could even tap 3 times on the wood table to ask for water. We walked together in the woods almost every afternoon, never more than a mile or 2 from the cabin, but Rook never strayed far. Sometimes he'd bring me things, smooth stones, feathers, or pine cones he seemed to find beautiful. Every time he did, I'd smile and nod. Gratitude, the bond growing deeper without a single spoken word. Then came the day that solidified everything. We were out beyond the creek, gathering firewood. The wind shifted and I caught a scent I knew too well. Wolf. Before I could react, I heard snarling, and a gray shape charged through the brush at my right side. I barely had time to raise the axe when Rook lunged. With a swift, powerful movement I never saw coming, he knocked the wolf aside and stood between me and the threat, chest heaving, teeth bared. The wolf hesitated, then fled back into the shadows. Rook turned to me, breath heavy, eyes wild, but when he saw I was safe, the fierce look softened. He stepped forward and placed a hand on my chest. Not a push, a check, a question: "Are you okay?" It was the first time I'd felt protected since my wife passed. Not just watched over, chosen. That moment I knew Rook wasn't just surviving here, he was staying here, with me. It happened on a morning just like any other. The sun was barely touching the treetops when I woke up and went to the kitchen to stoke the fire. Rook usually slept near the hearth on colder nights, curled up in that way he always did, knees tucked, one arm over his face. But that morning, the spot was empty. At first, I didn't think much of it. Maybe he'd gone outside early. Maybe he was gathering berries or collecting firewood like he sometimes did. But when I stepped out onto the porch and called his name, the forest didn't answer back the way it always had. I walked out a bit further, expecting to see that familiar, tall, dark shape moving between the trees. But there was nothing. No sound, no movement, no rustling brush or curious eyes watching from a distance. Just wind and the unsettling quiet of absence. I checked the shoreline by the creek, the grassy slope near the old pine stump where we'd once shared wild apples, even the thick brush near the blackberry patch he liked to pick from. The only thing I found were fading footprints, his prints larger now, leading out into the forest and then stopping. Just stopping. I spent the whole day calling his name, listening, waiting. My voice echoed off the trees and died somewhere in the wind. I must have walked miles that day. By dusk I was exhausted, but it wasn't the walking that weighed me down. It was knowing the trail had gone cold. I left food outside that night. Warm bread, water, even the blanket he sometimes used to curl up with when the nights were cold. I checked it the next morning. Not a single thing had been touched. Days went by. I kept leaving things out. I kept calling, but nothing ever moved. Nothing ever came back. It felt like losing a child all over again. The space beside the fire looked bigger. The woods felt emptier. I'd gotten used to a life I hadn't asked for. And then suddenly, without warning, it was gone. And the silence that filled that space was heavier than I'd ever imagined silence could be. 15 years passed. Seasons came and went, and somewhere in those years, I stopped checking the edge of the woods for footprints. My hair turned gray. My hands got slower, stiffer. The cabin felt smaller, and the old rocking chair by the fire became my evening companion. I'd long accepted that some things in life weren't meant to return. I didn't expect to hear from Rook again. Truth be told, I wasn't even sure he'd survived out there. I still thought about him sometimes, especially on the cold nights. But I'd tucked those memories away into a place I rarely opened. It was easier that way. Then, one winter evening, just past dusk, it happened. The air outside shifted. I remember hearing it before I felt it. Heavy branches moving, not with wind, but with weight. A low, deep sound carried through the trees, almost like a voice, but too thick, too deep for a human throat. I stood up slowly, grabbed the old flashlight I kept by the door, and stepped onto the porch. The air was still, the forest dark. Then between the trees I saw movement. Something tall, something massive. I raised the light, hand trembling. What I saw first wasn't a face or figure. It was a silhouette. A vast, towering shape partially hidden by the trees. 8 feet tall, maybe more. Thick, dark fur, broad shoulders, and then familiar eyes reflecting the light back at me. It was Rook. Grown. Magnificent. Calm. His breathing was slow, steady, almost knowing. But what chilled me wasn't his size or even the fact he was back. It was who was standing behind him, 3 figures. All tall, all covered in fur, all still silent, watching from the shadowed woods. A tribe, a family, the kind I'd never really let myself believe existed. My knees weakened, not in fear, but in a shock so deep it went straight to my bones. Rook had returned, but he wasn't alone anymore. For a moment I couldn't move. I just stood there, flashlight trembling in my grip as I stared out into the darkness. Rook took a slow step forward, the light catching the silver streaks in his fur, marks of age I hadn't expected. He looked different, older, stronger. But those amber eyes hadn't changed. They held something I remembered well. Familiarity. Recognition. Behind him, the others stood still and quiet. A family unit, perhaps. The tallest, likely the elder, hovered in the back, posture steady, eyes alert but patient. 2 smaller figures stood to the side, perhaps younger or less confident. Not once did any of them snarl, growl, or advance in aggression. They were watchful, present, and in their presence I felt no danger, only the weight of something important. Rook moved slowly, deliberately, until he was standing just a few feet from the porch. He lifted a hand, an enormous hand, and in it was something I hadn't expected. A wooden bowl, hand-carved, simple but smooth. Inside it was a small arrangement of forest berries, bright red and ripe, mixed with wildflowers and 2 river stones. One dark, one light, carefully placed. Deliberate. A gift. For a second, the world froze. I felt a tightness in my throat I couldn't swallow down. I slowly stepped forward, careful not to startle him. When I reached the edge of the porch, Rook held out the bowl. Our eyes locked, and in that shared silence, words weren't needed. I understood. This was gratitude, not just for the food or warmth I gave him years ago. He was thanking me for life, for a chance to grow, to belong, to return home stronger than when he left. My hand reached out, shaking, and I took the bowl. Rook exhaled, soft, slow. And then, with a small nod, he stepped back. Behind him, the others didn't move until he did. Their respect was clear. They knew who I was to him. And in that stillness, under the winter sky, surrounded by silent giants, I understood something I'd never dared believe. Rook hadn't forgotten me. He'd come back to show me. I hadn't wasted my kindness. Rook stood still for a long moment after placing the gift in my hands. His eyes stayed on mine, and in them I saw the same quiet intelligence, the same gentle spirit I had known all those years ago. Then he made a sound, soft, familiar. A low, rolling hum in his chest, followed by a shorter, warmer note. The same sound he used to make when he sat beside the fire as a child. It was goodbye. And thank you, all wrapped into one. I opened my mouth to speak, but nothing came. My voice had gotten lost somewhere in the last 15 years, wrapped in silence and memories I'd locked away. All I could do was nod, slowly, deeply, the way he once had, a gesture of trust. Rook turned then and walked back toward the trees, his tribe falling into step behind him. Not rushed, not afraid, just returning home. I stood there on the porch, bowl in my hand, heart full and breaking all at once. As the forest swallowed them back into the dark, I felt something warm slide down my cheek. A tear. It wasn't sadness alone. It was gratitude, too, and closure. I watched until the last shape disappeared. The woods went quiet again. But something in me had changed, like a door had finally closed gently after years of standing half open. People fear what they don't understand. But sometimes the wild isn't cruel, it's just different. Love takes many shapes. I didn't just save him. He saved me too.